Somebody said to me, "C'est pas marrant votre jeu. It's no fun this game. It's no fun this game." So what you need is a lot of patience. You need a lot of optimism. We need to bring people along with us. We need to respect them. How can we help them think differently if we've already decided that they never will? I really believe that user research empowers the people that are exposed to it. So promoting UX in a multinational organisation, international, that should be translated from the French, not French, organisation creating complex B2B products. Is it possible? I think it's possible. We might get to that, but let's think around that. So just some background and definitions. I should first say thanks, Theodora, for inviting me to speak, and I think it will segue nicely into what Anna Maria had to say. There's some things that I'll be repeating, which I think are helpful tips for you. So just touching on the definition, so UX user experience, obviously, and really a user-centered design. User-centric is what I'm interested in exploring. Business to business is obviously those situations where you might not even have access to your client because you're dealing with another business. You've got access to your client, but you might not actually have access to the people who are using the product. Or you might have a situation where your clients don't even want to reveal who those users are because you might then go to them directly and they want to avoid that situation. International, obviously lots of countries, remote access, remote work, teams based all over the world, clients based all over the world, and complex. I went to a course once a number of years ago, and it really helped me because I was, you go along to something that says it's going to help you solve all your problems, and they're showing the design of a shopping cart and like how to put a whole bunch of things on a screen, and shoes or something, and filters, and it's just like, this is so straightforward compared to what's really going on. But I was kind of like, well, is that all there is to it? And this course, they talked about complex products being those things that have like millions of whatever it is, millions of photos, millions of files, millions of customer records. So who here is dealing with like millions, any kind of things in the millions? Yep. Another criteria might be that it's a very specific domain. So it might be something like in the health domain, quite specific, or banking can be quite specific, or it might be in a legal sphere, or any number of, but where it's a very specific domain, it's just not general public. Anyone in that criteria fall into that category here? Yeah, quite a few. And then the third criteria they gave for a complex application was where it was configurable, so the clients could then go and modify that, set that up themselves so that then the users are using it in a specific way. It might even be to the extent, as it was for us, where you almost don't recognise your software because from one client to the next, they've configured it to their needs. Anyone in that situation? No, so sometimes you might have one or two or even three of those. And I'd like to add a fourth one to that, actually, is one that Anna Maria touched on, and that's the integration. When you've got integration with that product, often that adds another layer of complexity, which is not to be ignored. Some of the questions that arise around these topics are things like how to build credibility with decision makers. It's all of these things that Anna Maria talked about, that's just exactly what you should do. But if some people aren't even prepared to let people work together, they want to keep the designers designing a thing and sending it over the wall to the developers, and they don't want anybody anywhere near any clients or users, how do you kind of get that conversation going? How do you convince stakeholders who already are convinced that they've met their clients, they know what their clients need? And how do you navigate the political environment and keep your sanity? These aren't questions these are just things I hear. Oops, I'm supposed to use this little clicker. All right. So a few keys that are useful, just, we don't have much time, so I'll just give them off as little tips. I totally agree with Anna Maria. The most important thing, I think, is user research. So there's some of you might be familiar with something called the ladder of inference. There's a great little video by Ed Muzio, M-U-Z-I-O, on YouTube, I suppose. He just describes the ladder of inference. And the thing about that is that people can get caught seeing what they're expecting. And the only way to help them see something different, you telling them it's not like that, is not going to change their mind. If they see something that surprises them, then they might change their mind. They might still not actually process that and realise that they need to change their mind. But without that, they're never going to change their mind. So user research is the most important thing. As somebody mentioned here, it was getting the project managers in, or the product managers in, to watch some recordings that or be involved in the user research that they saw a difference and started behaving differently. So this is what I found helpful in the organisation where I was. Just going to breathe for a minute. And I really like government digital services in the UK. They talk about user research being a team sport. Again, that was something that was touched on earlier, bringing the whole team in. And the team might be somewhere else altogether, and the clients might be somewhere else altogether. So, I mean, what I did was just little remote recordings with not more than 20 minutes recorded, because I knew that the team wouldn't be allowed to even spend much time watching these recordings. Jared Spool of User UIE, he recommends 2 hours observation of research every 6 weeks, at least for everybody on any team making anything. And as we implemented that kind of thing, it really did make a difference. Different people looking at research see different things. So I did some recording, clients in one country, developers sending some prototypes for me to work with in another country, clients, just observation, getting them to sort of talk me through a screen and say what they're doing and how they're trying to get their jobs done so that we could create value for users. So that's the pragmatic part. Persistent, be persistent, highlight and remind. And this is just about helping people come around to these ideas. Now, you could flood them with a whole lot of information, but that's not going to help. So you have to pick a few. Pick a few key messages that you want to get across, and then every opportunity on the internal networks, you can say, you know, maybe using this think, make, check, you can say, oh, that's why I think the think, make, check approach is good. And then some other conversation, oh yeah, well that's where this think, make, check is really helpful. And so you sow that in, like planting seeds, and then at other meetings people will start talking about that. You just need to keep it simple and be persistent. And obviously be transparent, so sharing your work, not being afraid to, that it's going to speak for itself really. Either it works or it doesn't work. It's not up to you to prove that it does. So if it works, people are going to pick it up and it's going to go somewhere. And if it doesn't, well, why are we pushing it anyway? So let's just believe that it's going to stand on its own 2 feet. So I was invited to NC Les Ateliers to talk to some students there. It was where I did an Innovation by Design Masters a number of years ago, which I recommend to anybody who's thinking of doing something like that. But that's for chatting about afterwards. And and I thought, well, it'd be really interesting to try and describe this experience that I've been going through to try and influence the culture in my organisation. And I'd been to a conference a number of years earlier, and a woman there had said, what you're trying to do is going to take 20 years, but it's really good experience, so write down everything that's going on. So I was like, okay, so I kept notes. And so I had all my post-it notes all around the room, trying to think, okay, if I describe this as a journey, what's it going to look like? And in the end, I came up with this. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with this. This is a game called, in English it's called Snakes and Ladders. This is my version of it. and you have to roll a dice. It's based on an ancient Indian game from 400 years ago or something, I think. So you roll a dice. In my version, you have to roll a 1 to get started, to get yourself on the board. So you might be 4 people playing it. And then once you've managed to get a 1 to get started, you then have to roll the dice each time to go along the board. So you go along the bottom here, and then you might happen to land at the bottom of a ladder. So for example, you might be able to run a design sprint, let's say. You won't be able to see it, it's blurry. You might be able to read it, but the point is that there are all kinds of things that could take you up a ladder or down one. In this case, you might get to do a workshop with a group of people and explain to them why a user-centered design is important, or you might get to do some user research with the people that you need to and be able to share that. So these are like ladders. Or you might land on the head of a snake. Suddenly the budget you had for your innovation project was cut, the company was sold, the management team have been changed. In corporations, all these are constantly reorganising. So those kinds of things come up. Or you might find out you're being relocated, you've got 1 week left on the project and you have to do it remotely. It might be a little snake. So actually this is a moment where we're going to have a little bit of interactivity. So if you could just write you've got a minute or 2 to write your own. We've got some cards coming around. Shadora's going to pass them out. So just write, in your own experience, what was something that you, that was a snake or a ladder where you got to leap ahead because something really helpful happened, or you did something and that made a real difference, like the example we had earlier, showing some people some research that made a difference. So just write down a snake and a ladder, or a snake or a ladder if you can only come up with one. And we'll take just a couple of minutes to do that. Feel free to write them in French. All right, so now what I'd like you to do is get in little groups of 3 or 4, just with the people next to you, because we're here for networking actually, and just share with each other, go around each, share one snake or ladder, and then if there's more, keep sharing those. We'll just spend 4 or 5 minutes on this, but it's a nice way of getting the conversation going. So just get yourself in a group of 3 or 4 and share those experiences that you've got on your little cards. You might have to move the chairs around a little bit, or move yourselves around a little bit. We'll put some background music on. Bum, 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 bum. Right, I'm going to bring you back. You'll be able to carry on chatting in the marvellous apéro that we'll be enjoying together afterwards. But I just want to finish this. So I started, when I was invited to work with these students, we started by playing this game. I stayed up till 2 in the morning making these, colouring in and gluing on and sticking on the snakes. I had a marvellous time. And so they played this game, and then after a while somebody said to me, "C'est pas marrant votre jeu. It's no fun this game. It's no fun this game." And what had happened to him was that he was right here at the start, and he managed to get to 22, nowhere near 100. And every single time, for at least 5 times in a row, he landed back on that, your meeting was cancelled with the manager that you are hoping to discuss, think, make, check, or whatever it might be. And he was just like, always back down. And he was just like, this is no fun at all. And I was like, well, actually, this is what life is like. You will have your meeting planned with somebody that you need to discuss this with, and then their daughter will be sick and they have to go to hospital. You will have the next meeting planned, and then their flight will be delayed and they won't be able to get back to have the meeting with you. You'll have the next meeting planned and there'll be some emergency with a client and they'll have to go to it. And none of these are, they want to have the meeting with you, they're interested in hearing your ideas, and you have to remind yourself of this, because if they weren't, they wouldn't accept the meeting in the first place. But sometimes you might start to wonder. So what you need is a lot of patience, you need a lot of optimism to just keep yourself going, because you get these knockbacks. You need humility and respect. You need to remember that, if somebody doesn't see what you see, that doesn't mean they're an idiot. You might be missing something. We just need some more information. We need some more information injected into the conversation, and that might come from user research, and they need to be exposed to that. That's why it's always really helpful to bring that in. We need to bring people along with us. We need to respect them. How can we help them think differently if we've already decided that they never will? We just have to reach them where they are. And a wonderful book I just finished reading recently called Creativity Inc. by Ed Catmull. He highlights how much chance plays a part in this. And I really like that he actually acknowledges that. He doesn't say we've done a wonderful thing because we're just wonderful. He says we've worked hard and we are wonderful, and we got lucky sometimes. And I think that's also really important to be aware of. There'll be, you might have a situation where suddenly everything works out, you're able to use some remote software, you're able to get a team working together even though they're different, like it's a cross-cultural or like cross-functional team. And these are great opportunities. And then other times that just might not work out. So you just got to roll with the punches. So the keys again, be pragmatic, insist on user research. You can't go anywhere without it. You do need to be creative sometimes and think of, if you can't get to the users, who might be like our users? Are there retired ones of those that I could test this with? Is there something that's similar to this type that I could talk to or rather observe? I mean, you don't want to avoid obviously asking for preferences, but you want to see how people respond. Be persistent, highlight, remind, be transparent, share your work, and remember, don't take it personally.
Are there any questions? Thank you. You're welcome very much. It was great to see some of you guys interact as well, people that don't know each other. Oh, this works. Great.
Thank you for your talk. I don't know if you mentioned it was a presentation just before, but also during the talk, during the chat, we mentioned often B2B companies don't really put the effort into proper user research. What would you recommend to what kind of initiatives you can do to push user research, especially in companies where they think they know the customers because they have project managers or customer success managers who are maybe in constant talk with buyers, but actually it's not the same thing as being close to the user.
Yeah, so so what I did was I made my way to the users and worked backwards. So I did some observational research, which I recorded, and then I managed to show it to these people in a group context. So that was one of the ladders. I just had a really good opportunity. And then one of the heads of product jumped up when he saw it and said, "Those people are not using our software correctly." So immediately he could see, wait a minute, maybe there's something that, something isn't working here. They're not using it the way we're expecting them to. But there's been a shift because, 20 years ago when people were made to use software at work, that was the only place that they used a computer. So they would struggle with it, and then they'd go, oh, silly me, I'm not very good with computers. But now they go to work, and the software's not very good, and they go home and they use software that's easy to use. You know, they do all their, you know, things that they don't know that it's harder or easier to develop, you know, the software that they use at home. They just go into work and think, why is this software so hard? You know, I'm not stupid. It's hard. So there's been a shift of expectation. So I think for that reason, people, there is more focus, because the people who are using it are now starting to complain. Instead of thinking that they're the problem, they're starting to say, I don't like this software. You know, can we change it? And businesses don't want unhappy users, especially if the users are aware that this is wasting their time and they could be working more efficiently. So the shift is sort of coming from both angles, but the key really is confronting people with some of that. And like I said, even if you do confront some people with that, with a user sort of struggling, I mean, we had a classic case that got fixed immediately, which was wonderful, but it was the developers had optimized for page loading so that pages loaded really quickly, and users had to choose roughly 6 countries that they were working with out of the list of however many countries there are, and they had to go through all these pages and pages to find all the countries. So it took them about 2 minutes to choose 6 countries when they could have just had all the countries on one screen and stabbed at them. But the reason that the users were focusing on page loads, they weren't actually thinking about the task. The developers were focusing on page load and not thinking about the task that the user had to do. And whenever they tested it, they chose, you know, like whatever the Andalusia, Australia, Austria. So for them, they never had to go past page 1. So when they observed a real user having to choose, you know, China, Singapore, and, you know, the other countries, suddenly they were like, ooh. And what's more, it was great. The user was going, this is a nightmare. And I put like subtitles on so that nobody could miss it. So, and that just, you know, obviously that kind of thing just gets fixed straight away. So that does help convince people. Otherwise, they just get the message back that people are struggling with it, and it's so vague that nothing precise ever gets done about it to help them. Or a whole lot of, you know, a whole lot of time's wasted and it doesn't go anywhere. Hope that helps.
When you're working in a company, which stakeholders are the hardest to convince? And on the other end, which are the one easiest to convince? And can you explain how you usually do it?
There is no type for hard or easy to convince. You might have a developer who thinks that, you know, I don't need anybody telling me what size font people can read, you know, or you might have a director saying, well, you know, who's asking the users anyway? They're not paying our bills. So, I mean, but it really depends on the person and whether they're paying attention, you know, whether they're a learner, I guess. Yeah, I'm not sure if that helps, but essentially just keep on, help. I mean, I've found it really helpful to understand that there's a mentality from exploration to exploitation. I don't know if you've read The Innovator's Method by Nathan Furr, an excellent book. And this idea that managers actually, all they've been learning to do is exploitation, operational management, more and more efficient. And innovation is right at the other end, it's at the exploration end. So it's the opposite of everything that's natural to them, that they know is right. So if you're taking them into this ambiguous, uncertain zone, they're going to feel like that's not the right direction. Whereas if you can get the opportunity to explain to them that there are these 2 zones and that you're going to take them there, then you'll find there's some that will walk that way with you once they understand that that's what's going on. Otherwise they'll just feel the discomfort and they'll think they know better because they do know how to manage.
Any other questions? I had a question to follow up on that. What type of, maybe during workshops or conversations with stakeholders, what type of language tactics, conversational tactics do you use when someone tells you things like, well, the users don't pay the bills, or how do you convince these stakeholders? Is there a formula?
Well, I mean, the best way, there's no telling people. I mean, there's another wonderful book. It's important to remember that it's Chris Argyris that did this research where every one of us, we want to win. We want to win and not lose. We want to remain in unilateral control. We want to avoid negative feelings. We don't want to look embarrassed or stupid. And we want to appear rational at all times. So being aware that I also, when I'm in this conversation, I just keep reminding myself, I am also wanting to win. So I need to just put that all aside and try and bring some fresh information into this conversation by asking questions. Just ask some open questions that might help us both see the situation differently. The danger is, of course, thinking and you need to convince them, and then you end up in that loggerhead situation. So that's the key, is just to try and keep the conversation open and let it go in any direction that it might, and ask the open questions that help bring fresh information into the conversation. What else might this person be thinking about or know about that I'm not aware of that might help cause them to be thinking that way? You can say, well, is there a business reason that I'm not aware of here? Is this customer not paying our bills, or is the company about to go in a particular direction and therefore that user's feedback is not relevant? There might be some reason behind there that you're not actually aware of. So.
That's a great answer, and I just want to add something to this. I feel sometimes it's worth even interviewing your stakeholders and build empathy for them, because they might have some hidden agendas or ambitions that, if you don't know them, then it's hard to take that into account. But they might be working towards their next promotion, and they think they might be convinced that with using a certain technology that is going to be the case, or there are things going on, dynamics between different departments, politics. So it's always good to be aware of those things and taking some time to talking to those stakeholders and ask them questions like you would to a user. That can help also understand some dynamics that are going on in the background.
Thank you very much. There's one last question. Okay, last one.
Yeah.
Thank you. One of the things you said there is people really try to avoid bad feelings, and that includes embarrassment. One of the hardest things about selling, finding users, use the effort, and sitting down is it very often is embarrassing. And some people usually get a good feeling that maybe I don't want to talk to users because then I might have to change my mind and change my direction. Do you have any tips for what you can do to sort of either avoid that in the beginning or help or fix it after it happens?
Well, I mean, just from my experience, it might not quite answer your question, but I did notice that some people are more comfortable in this situation than others. I mean, I'm quite happy to watch users having a terrible time. It doesn't bother me, whereas some people will immediately need to say, it's this one over here, or, and they can't help save them because they, or it might be precisely because they can't understand why anyone could possibly get that wrong, and then, think that they need to point it out, how could you be so thick? So I did, I mentor people on the team, but I did seek out those people who had a bit of a natural aptitude for asking open questions, even though, everyone was trained, but some people, they just couldn't help themselves. They're more like real teachers, and they wanted to teach the people the interface. So then, of course, you immediately don't find out the flaws in the interface or the prototype or even even in the interviewing stage, when you're just doing open questions, So it depends on the person. But if you've got those recorded, one thing that I think is really important is to not digest that and just produce a report. Have those raw recordings digested by the team. Get them to say, okay, teach them obviously to do it in 2 steps. Don't do a solution, just observe what happened here. Oh, that's interesting. They were talking about this particular topic. That came up in 3 different things. We've never even heard of that. What is that? Those kinds of things. So, but expose them to it directly, because I really believe that user research empowers the people that are exposed to it. That's often why, project managers, they like to keep hold of that, because they like to be the ones that are exposed to the research. They can have all the ideas, but everybody has different kind of ideas, as we know. So the more people we expose to the research, if we're open to letting them have their ideas, it might be technical ideas if they're developers, it might be design ideas if they're designers, we all benefit. But it's you win some, you lose some. The team might start out meeting together and seeing that it's really effective, and then somebody says, you're not allowed to spend that time on that. Only these 3 people are allowed to do that from now on. So then sometimes you just have to work within the constraints that you've got. Have lunchtime sessions if people are open to it. If they understand that will empower them, they might be willing to go along and learn what's really going on in their users' world. What we've done out the apéro section is we've put some tape on the wall under some lights, and we invite you to stick your cards just there, so then you can continue the conversation. You can read what other people have written and carry on discussing your snakes and ladders.
Thank you very much.